All right, everyone, welcome to Her Take. We are scattered across the country once again. I'm in DC, Anna's in LA, Lindy's in Philly, Amy's in Florida. We're everywhere. But before we get started, I want you to subscribe, click the bell notification, please, if you're enjoying the show, because it helps us out a ton with the algorithm. We've got a fantastic guest today. Former Senator Kyrsten Sinema is here. Now, she's known for her independent streak and bipartisan deal-making in Washington, very rare. And she's now bringing that same centrist voice to the private sector, advising on law, policy, and emerging industries like finance and tech. Kyrsten, thanks so much for joining us today. Do we have her? Do we have her? Ah, there we go.
Good morning. I'm excited to be with you all.
This is crazy.
You got the memo. Yeah. Oh, look, now it's for real trends. That's what I'm talking about.
The kids don't even understand what's going to happen to them yet. They look at me and my little old lady, like all my gear, my nootropics, my coffee, my nicotine gum, my old lady readers. And I know you guys have sympathy. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so I would love to talk about that too. Okay.
All right. Well, we've got a lot to cover. So here's the rundown. First on deck, at the SCO Summit, Modi doubles down on energy ties with Putin, even as the U.S. hits India with steep tariffs, sending a message to New Delhi that its Russian oil purchases will not come without costs. Anna's going to walk us through that. And then at home, the fight over tariffs moves to the Supreme Court, signaling that Trump's trade agenda is as much a test of judicial authority as economic policy. In Venezuela, things are escalating. The U.S. military strikes a suspected drug cartel boat as a warning to traffickers and the Maduro regime. But, of course, this is raising questions about whether this is truly about the drug cartel or regime change. Lindy's going to tackle that. Florida moves to end vaccine mandates for school children, sending a message of state-level independence on public health policy. People are freaking. That one I'm handling. And then Harvard wins a $2.6 billion case against the administration, with courts pushing back on politics in higher ed. And last but not least, we are breaking down the latest in the Epstein case, newly unsealed documents, 3 minutes of prison video that was just released, survivor testimony, and more. And of course, Amy's got all the details. So first up, at the Shanghai Cooperation Summit, we saw Modi and Putin reaffirm their special relationship. Anna, what the heck is going on here? What is happening?
Well, what's going on is India's need for energy security. And since the beginning of Russia's invasion into Ukraine in 2022, India became a huge exporter of Russian oil. And so as Donald Trump kind of ramps up for secondary sanctions against Russia, he's essentially urging India to avoid purchasing Russian oil. But what was really interesting and what was on full display at the SCO Summit was the reality that honestly, the United States and its influence is waning and is not really having much of an impact on what Narendra Modi, the leader of India, is willing to do. So as a result, Trump has responded with, some pretty significant tariffs against India. So let me walk you through all of that. So Trump, let me just note, had already slapped India with 25% tariffs as part of his whole Liberation Day tariff policy. And the whole idea was that we have a trade deficit with India. And as a result, Trump finds that to be deeply unfair and slaps him with 25% tariffs. Now, the point was to renegotiate that, but the negotiations haven't been going so well because of the fact that India is essentially saying, no, we're going to go ahead and buy oil. Check out this headline from the New York Times. India will buy Russian oil despite Trump's threats. Officials say there is growing sense in India that its leaders should not allow American policymaking to shape its choices on vital energy supplies. And so analysts and officials in New Delhi said that if the move were intended to pressure Russia, its efficacy was questionable, considering that China and Turkey and two other major importers of Russian oil. And Trump hasn't really approached them about how they need to stop taking Russian oil. Plus, according to the New York Times, replacing Russian oil with new sources could bring additional costs to closer sources of oil, like Saudi Arabia, for instance, sell at a higher price to Asian countries because of a policy called Asian Premium, maintained by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. And so then the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit happens, which was attended by many of the US's adversaries or foes. That includes, China, which hosted the event, of course, Russia, Iran. More and more countries are kind of aligning themselves with that side in this multipolar world. And also, of course, present was India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Take a look.
The leaders of Russia and India were having a love-in, note the hands, and then a huddle with their Chinese hosts. President Trump has imposed 50% tariffs on India because it continues to purchase Russian oil. President Trump's erratic foreign policy, 1 minute self-assigned global peacemaker, the next aggressive isolationist, has allowed China to present itself by contrast as a stable, predictable partner in a multipolar world.
Okay. So it's really interesting to kind of see this, public display of affection between Vladimir Putin and Narendra Modi. They were literally holding hands, which I thought was interesting. And the whole point was to kind of provide this public display of unity, to kind of reaffirm their relationship. Obviously, it's a business type relationship, it's a trade type relationship. But Russian oil accounts for 40% of India's supply, and that is not a small amount. And Russia, I guess to show favorability to India, especially since it's willing to continue exporting oil from Russia, has discounted per barrel $3 to $4 for India specifically for the next 2 months. So, Putin is looking to sweeten the deal for India. But I think what stands out the most about this, guys, is the fact that at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, again, hosted by China, you have Narendra Modi present. Narendra Modi was kind of singing sweet nothings in China's ear. And to kind of give you context, India and China have not had a friendly relationship. Really, what has happened is, Donald Trump's policies have essentially pushed India into China's arms, which is, I don't think, the best policy in terms of what you're looking for in the best interests of the American people. And by the way, we do rely on India for quite a bit of trade. Now, Trump is downplaying that, but India happens to be our 9th largest trading partner. We do rely on them for imports, including textiles, precious gems, steel, machinery, and more. So I'm curious what you ladies think about this, especially Senator Sinema, to be honest with you, because, you spent time in the Senate. What do you think about how Trump has handled trade and, just geopolitical matters?
So I think a couple things to just kind of set the table for a conversation like this is to know that, President Trump doesn't have strong opinions on lots of things. But when he does have a strong opinion, he has that strong opinion. And he believes in tariffs, period. Trump believes in tariffs. And so the tariff conversation is not going to go away. And it's going to be shaped by his core beliefs. So that's the first thing I would say is you can be like, oh, I'm frustrated because of this impact of his decisions. That's fine. You can be frustrated. But Trump is going to Trump. He believes in tariffs. And so, number one, knowing that he believes in tariffs and thinking to yourself, what does that look like in the context of these interactions that are not just about goods and trade, but as we see, also about geopolitics. So that's the first thing I would think about. The second thing I would think about is the efforts that the United States is making under this administration to increase domestic energy production, right? So President Trump stood up a group called the National Energy Defense Council. It's headed up by Jared Agan, super smart guy, 100% focused on increasing American domestic energy production, which would make us less reliant on foreign or volatile sources for energy. That's supported, of course, across the administration, Secretary Wright, Secretary Burgum, across the entire administration, Administrator Zeldin and others. So kind of thinking about those two things is really important to help situate this conversation, to know that it's not just about, oh, is India cozying up to China or cozying up to Russia? What do they need from them? What do they want from them? I mean, look, guys, it makes sense that the president of India is going to work closely with whomever is providing him with the greatest source of energy for his country. Like, he has to provide energy for his country. So that's not weird. That is what a leader does, right?
That's totally normal. I mean, I would expect that from India, but I have a follow-up question to that. Sorry, ladies, but I think this is important.
No, go, Anna. It's a very interesting. Keep going.
So when you talk about the need to increase energy production at home, I hear you. And I think most Americans think it works in a certain way where, you know, the country that produces the energy gets to benefit from it first and foremost. But as we know, certainly with the OPEC plus cartel setup, it's basically a global energy supply. So our oil companies or our natural gas companies can produce, you know, as much oil or natural gas as they want, but there's really no regulation stopping them from selling it on the international stage, and they're going to sell it to the highest bidder, right? So how does that benefit Americans? Right.
I mean, that's the free market. So I mean, that makes sense. I get it. What we have to do is create incentives for us to utilize our own energy in our own country, right? And with the advancement of AI and the race that we're in against China to dominate the AI war, right? I see this as a national security imperative. We are literally in a war with China to determine whether or not the globe is going to use American AI values or whether they're going to have to rely on Chinese Communist Party AI values, right? We don't win that war if we don't control the energy production. So if we can't produce enough energy to power the AI right here in our country, we will not beat China. And so you've got to think about both the capitalism here, right? Like, you're going to produce energy and sell it to the highest bidder, but also the national security imperative of what happens if we don't win this AI war? What happens if China does become the leading AI voice and producer of AI tools for the globe? And so I think at that point, you're starting to talk to American energy companies about not just capitalism, which we all believe in, but also national security. Like, where does your loyalty and where do your priorities lie? And how can we induce incentives for American companies to produce more American energy through all the sources, right? We need every electron available. We need every bit of energy available that can be produced. We need it right here in our own country. How do we both create that financial incentive and help everyone understand the national security imperative? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. What about nuclear? Did you guys ever discuss nuclear in the Senate?
Yeah, we do a ton. So this is a big part of the NEDC's work, and I'm really excited. You know, one of the things I'm working on now is I'm the chair of a group called the AI Infrastructure Coalition. My co-chair is former Congressman Garrett Graves of Louisiana, energy expert, genius. And we're actually working closely with the administration to increase nuclear production, small modular reactors, investing in nuclear fission research, because that is going to be a very powerful and plentiful and clean source of energy for the future. But in the meantime, before we get there on nuclear, we've got to dramatically increase our production of traditional energy sources. So continuing to do work around natural gas, increasing like our oil production domestically, but also ensuring that we're making solar affordable. Like, we've got to kind of use all of those energy sources together to fuel this future.
Senator Sinema, thank you so much for joining us today. I have a quick response to, or just a question to something that you just said. I am deeply concerned about the war between the United States and China in terms of AI. And I'm just curious, I do have another thing to say after this though, but I wanted to get your thoughts on whether it's a good idea for NVIDIA to sell chips to China. Jensen Huang and Trump are in talks about selling, and perhaps the United States even benefiting apart from these sales. Is a really good idea to give them this intel if we are locked in this conflict, this Cold War conflict with them in terms of AI. It definitely concerns me, especially with DeepSeek and everything that's going on. And it seems like China is pulling ahead in this tussle. But going back to the summit on the whole, I think one of the most significant things coming out of this is the fact that Slovakia, which guess what, is a NATO member, attended the summit. I think that is a tremendous deal because the NATO alliance is a famously Western alliance. It's led by the United States and it's shaped by the post-war order. Now we see Slovakia inching into China's arms, and they're even questioning whether they should remain in our alliance.
Yeah.
So I think right now we have to be extremely careful about the bluster that we're exhibiting on the international stage, because it might have a lot of unintended consequences, which is strengthening China's hand. I mean, Xi Jinping is looking he's gloating right now. He's getting chummy with so many people that we had tried to court over the decades.
I want to put a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator. Go ahead and
No,
answer that.
Go ahead.
Well, I want to put a question to all of you, given what all three of you have said thus far, right? If I'm looking at the broad strokes of this, what does Trump want with Putin? He wants to end the war in Ukraine. He's tried diplomacy. It doesn't work. So now we're back to NATO buying weapons from us and arming Ukraine and going back to sanctions and secondary sanctions. But he tried diplomacy and it didn't work. Okay, now what do we want with India? Well, obviously, as Anna mentioned, they're a huge trade partner for us, but we also want to maintain balance in the world's power, right? So we want to empower India to keep China in check. And that's not working. So then I would simply say, what is an alternative strategy? Because if I'm Trump and he's trying diplomacy and that's not working, and he's trying sanctions and he's trying tariffs, all of these things, what do we recommend? Because these are real problems.
Yeah.
Good question.
The United States is still doing business with Russia. So we could even restrict our own actions, but we're not willing to yet.
Yeah.
I think we definitely need to. We should have been willing 2 years ago, from my point of view. But the United States is actively doing business with Russia. We are still buying your stuff, and that's fueling their war effort.
So we've got to really think about this from a multifaceted strategy, right? So Jillian, you said, okay, so we tried diplomacy and it didn't work, and then we tried sanctions and it didn't work. And the reality is that if you want to have an impact at the geopolitical scale, you've got to attack it from multiple angles and see it as a coordinated strategy rather than just a one-off here or a one-off there, right? And it's like so deeply American to be like, well, we did that one summit and it didn't work. The reality is, and you know this, when you're working on a strategy, it takes years to plan. It takes years to execute. You've got to have like multifaceted elements. You've got to think about it from this like holistic perspective. And so I guess the one thing I would say is that as civilians, we might look and say, well, you know, he tried that summit and it didn't work, and he tried these sanctions and it didn't work. And something to consider is that, you know, maybe there's more going on than you read about in the newspaper or see on the news, that maybe there is a multifaceted strategy that's going to roll out over time. It's going to take time to implement. It's going to take time to have impacts. But Lindy's point is a really important one. Both the point about NATO folks who are kind of sneaking out and bleeding over into the, quote, other side, that's a concern. How do we address that? Lindy, I mean, you create incentives for folks to stay with you, right? You have to create incentives for folks to stay with you. And you've got to do that from both a financial and a geopolitical perspective. And so we've got to think, what is it that we can do so that Slovakia wants to be with us rather than with them, right?
Yeah.
What is it that we can do to ensure that countries who are maybe in that kind of smaller countries, in that middle ground, who are thinking, do I want to align myself with these guys or with those guys? Make yourself attractive, both from a financial and a geopolitical perspective, so that folks want to align with you. And again, you know, Lindy, we agree 100% that this is, I mean, like a Cold War, except for it's a technological revolution, right? But this is going to have an impact for the entire future of our globe. We can't afford to F it up, right? Like, we've got to win this one. We've got to do it right. And we need as many allies at the table as possible. And so thinking strategically and holistically about things like tariffs and trade policy, economic policy writ large, energy policy, and even kind of the soft power that we can use politically, globally. All of those we need to think about them all together and have a multifaceted strategy.
I'm just afraid that we're dismantling a lot of our soft power arsenal, right? We're cutting foreign aid. I'm actually in favor of that. I don't think we should be spending billions of dollars in Africa, for instance. But I think, you know, if we can strategically tailor where we're
actually, Lindy, if you're not doing it, who is doing it?
China.
But I'm just saying for Slovakia, my point is right now they might prefer the Chinese model, which is benign neglect, like laissez-faire. We're not going to get involved in your domestic affairs. We're going to let you do whatever you want. We're going to be predictable. We're not going to be.
But it is a very extractive policy. If you take a look at what China's doing in South and Latin America and throughout Africa, it's quite extractive. They're going in and they're like, oh yeah, we'll do your energy stuff for you.
Right.
But then they're like taking it, right?
Right.
So
the
that's something to
playbook.
consider. Yeah.
Great book on that. It's called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It was our playbook, and China has adopted it and pushed the up button. And they did the same things in Pakistan. Oh, we're going to build your entire infrastructure. It's fascinating and terrifying all at the same time. Okay, final thoughts on this. And Amy, you didn't get to talk.
Thank you. Yeah, for one, I personally believe that we have already been in a Cold War with China for quite some time now. They have been attacking us on multiple different fronts, whether it be psychological warfare through the TikTok algorithm, whether it be, Chinese nationals smuggling things into America to try to harm our infrastructure and our production. There's numerous fronts that they're attacking us on, and we seem to be discussing mostly the financial element of these world superpowers coming together. And this is something we've discussed at length on this show. Anna did a really great story about the BRICS effort to dethrone the dollar. And I chimed in and talked about the terrifying repercussions of a CBDC currency being installed after that. All of these things are concerning to me. But what I want to know from you ladies is, how concerned are you about the show of force from a military aspect? Because we're going to jump to tariffs. We're going to talk about the financial side of things. But from a military aspect, how concerned are you guys here? I've heard that, that China is kind of like a paper tiger is the expression that was used, that, a lot of their military force and their weapons aren't nearly as terrifying as what they make them out to be. But from a militaristic aspect, are you concerned about this? And also, when Trump left his tweet, because I'm not sure if we discussed this, he said, they're plotting to take over America. Is he referring to a financial aspect, dethroning the dollar, affecting trade, or is he more so talking about the militaristic aspect of an actual hot war, a real attack?
Well, I mean, let's think about in today's world, a financial attack, a financial takeover is just as serious and just as dangerous as a physical attack, right? I mean, that's different than it was 100 years ago, but that is the reality in which we live.
Well, some would argue that what Trump is engaging in with his tariffs is, a financial attack. And it is interesting to see how those tariffs are kind of playing into the geopolitical makeup, the different, alliances and all that. And we could talk about tariffs now if you're ready, Jillian, or we can.
I was
about the China thing. One last thing. I just don't think it's a good idea for us to come out, like Peter Navarro said, and just basically slam India as Putin's laundromat. I don't think that's conducive to our foreign policy, especially because we so badly need India as a buffer for China. And he just doubled down today. He called India's money blood money. I just don't think that's a rhetoric that we need right now. We need India on our side as an ally against China.
Right. But Lindy, the thing to remember is that Trump is going to Trump. Right.
This is Peter Navarro, by the way.
I mean, as we move into tariffs, I think I'll just remind everyone what I've been saying this for years. Trump is going to Trump. Like Trump.
I know that, but the Supreme Court's going to Supreme Court. So we'll see what happens right now.
Okay, so we're going to jump to that. But what I would simply say is, you got to have some policy that makes them hesitant. Like, it can't be all, hey, look how attractive we are. It can't. There's got to be something in there that says, don't do it. Surely there has to be deterrence. And speaking of deterrence, so we're going to move on, as Anna suggested, to Trump's tariff policies, which have, thank you, Lindy, now landed in the Supreme Court after lower courts struck down parts of his trade agenda for exceeding presidential authority under emergency power. So the administration is asking the justices to overturn those rulings, which of course sets up a high stakes fight over who really controls U.S. trade policies. Is it the president or is it Congress? So Anna, take us through this.
Yes. So, there have been some legal challenges to Trump being able to unilaterally engage in this like widespread, trade war with various countries, including our longtime trade partners. So it has worked its way through the federal courts, and a federal appeals court did just strike down Trump's tariff policies. So this is from Politico, an excerpt. They write that, call it Chicken Little defense. If the courts do not sign off on the administration's tariffs, it would be a total disaster for the country and would literally destroy the United States of America, Trump said on Friday, after the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit ruled that the bulk of the president's tariffs are illegal. But he doubled down on those claims on Tuesday while tacking on the transparently ridiculous assertion that the U.S. is taking in $17 trillion because of tariffs. Okay, so he is going to take this fight to the Supreme Court, but I just want to briefly address his claims that the tariffs have brought in $17 trillion in revenue for the federal government. First of all, I seriously wish that were true, because our federal debt is a complete and utter disaster. We talk about it on the show all the time. But it is absurd to claim that. China's entire GDP is $18.7 trillion. The entire global GDP for 2024 was $110 trillion. And then days prior to that, Trump had pulled a completely different number out of his ass, which was $8 trillion. So we don't know the exact amount based on what Trump is saying, because he says different things on different days. And look, it isn't just libs that are shooting down this unilateral trade policy by Trump. The conservative Manhattan Institute's Jessica Riedel basically called Trump out on his inconsistencies, saying today alone, the White House claimed $8 trillion in new tariff revenue, $4 trillion in net deficit reduction, $4 trillion in new business investment, hundreds of thousands of jobs from these investments, record low gas prices. Each claim is completely 100% made up. Again, that's not from a liberal. That's from a conservative, from the conservative Manhattan Institute. And look, the lower courts haven't bought Trump's narratives on tariffs either. So a 3-judge panel on the U.S. Court of International Trade unanimously ruled that Trump's tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers were illegal. Then the Federal Appeals Court in D.C. also struck down his tariffs. The court found in a 7-4 ruling last Friday that Trump overstepped his presidential powers when he invoked a 1977 law designed to address national emergencies to justify the reciprocal tariffs. And so now, it really will remain up to the Supreme Court whether or not Trump can implement these tariffs. But one thing that I'll say is, if the Supreme Court agrees with the lower courts that what Trump is doing is illegal, that really does kind of throw in the air like the question of what happens to the already negotiated trade deals with countries like Vietnam, for instance. Like, they have finished their trade deal. They have come to a conclusion. Does that conclusion get rolled back to what it was prior to Liberation Day? I don't know. And that could cause a bit of a mess.
Senator, honestly, first question, I think, after listening to Anna lay this out for us, is who actually is supposed to be in control of our trade policy? Is it Congress or is it the president?
Yeah.
What does the law say?
So historically, it's been, Congress makes these decisions with the, assent or guidance and cooperation of the president. But Congress has ceded its authority in not only this area, but many other areas for decades. We've all seen this, right? That Congress just chooses not to do some of the stuff it's supposed to do. Congress is supposed to have war powers and declare war, but Congress doesn't really do that anymore. And so presidents have done it for the last, 30 plus years. Congress is supposed to set policy for lots of areas, but because they are often, engaged in partisan friction, and they just are frozen and they choose not to take action. And nature abhors a vacuum. And so when Congress chooses not to act, the administration comes in and fills that hole. And it's not just the Trump administration. We saw that Biden did it. We saw that Obama did it. We saw that, every president has done it in the last 30 plus years. And in fact, what I have often called executive overreach or executive zealotry has grown in each successive administration since the Reagan years. So the fact that we're in this position is not unique to a President Trump. We are in this position because Congress, over the course of several decades, has chosen to become frozen in its partisanship, which cedes authority and leaves this vacuum for the administration. Now,
to your point, sorry to interrupt you, but to your point, you're absolutely right about, more power being concentrated in the executive branch as a result of Congress ceding power.
Yes.
And so the lower court's rulings were very specific because there absolutely are instances in which, the executive branch can unilaterally implement some tariffs. But the Federal Appeals Court said last Friday that U.S. law bestows significant authority on the president to undertake a number of actions in response to a declared national emergency, but none of these actions explicitly include the power to impose tariffs, duties, or the like. So the argument is what Trump is citing as justification for doing these widespread tariffs is what the courts are essentially rejecting, right? Because it's so widespread and it's unbounded in scope, amount, and duration, the court said.
So I think what you're likely to see, and I don't want to get too like nerdy wonky, but as you guys know, I'm also an attorney. I think that what you're likely to see when this all settles out is that the president will have authority to engage in bilateral negotiations, country by country, and maybe there will need to be some kind of assent or approval from Congress. So like NAFTA type agreements, et cetera, right? Where you've got an agreement with one country, an agreement with a couple of countries, negotiated by the administration, and then maybe Congress says, yep, we approve, or maybe Congress says, no, we don't approve. And so I think that's where you're likely to see this kind of shake out. But what I don't think you'll see is a court that strikes down the negotiated agreements that have already occurred. I don't think that that's likely to occur.
Senator, I love what you just said, because you cite NAFTA, and it's so ironic to me because Trump has actively warred against NAFTA and in order any sort of multilateral trade agreement for decades at this point. So if he ironically establishes one, that would be deeply ironic. I just want to say one thing. I'm a fiscal conservative, so I like inherently conservative policies. And I do want to remind folks that tariffs are an internal tax on American consumers. You can deny it all you want, but that is the truth. Americans are paying for it. It's not foreign companies, it's Americans. And I've really tried to support President Trump on so many of his policies, and I think he's doing a good job on several fronts. But on this particular front, Americans are facing the full brunt of this. And a lot of the promises that he said would pan out haven't actually worked out that way. For example, he said he would bring manufacturing jobs back. And I'm sorry if this angers people, but I also have an obligation to tell the truth on this matter. He said manufacturing jobs have come out, but they haven't. In fact, the manufacturing industry has been hemorrhaging jobs, hemorrhaging.
Well,
if it weren't for the
Lindy, we do have a 17.8% reshoring compared to 2.5% in the year before Trump took office. There are new jobs coming to significant amounts.
Did you see the Friday jobs report? 22,000. And in fact, it was so bad that the June jobs revision was down to negative 13,000. We are hemorrhaging jobs right now. It hasn't been so bad since the pandemic. So
but
we
are
have
we
to be very
conflating
careful.
two
The American
issues?
economy is extremely fragile right now.
Okay,
Not only that, Trump told us that we would have that working men would gain more jobs. We are not gaining more jobs. In fact, by many,
where are these numbers coming from?
Economic indicators, we are now already in a recession.
And but Lindy, remember, if we are comparing that to the jobs report that came out after COVID, we need to keep in mind that they were.
Oh, no, I'm not. I'm just saying it hasn't been as bad.
Okay, because they were very deceptive with the numbers from that specific report, right? Because the way that they structured it was jobs that came back, right? Jobs that were already there, but people were working from home. When they came back, they
take COVID out. That's not at all my point of comparison. I'm just saying it hasn't been as bad. It's that bad. Negative 13,000 jobs in June, 22,000 jobs in August. This is not a good jobs report.
But here's my question.
I'm going to offer something controversial or provocative to think about here, which is this.
Please.
Like, we're in this time of like real flux, right? So when American companies say they want to onshore jobs and bring jobs back, it's going to take time to do so, right? It's going to take time to do so.
How are they going to onshore jobs? How are going to change their whole business strategy if they had no idea what's going on? Right now, our businesses are buffeted by uncertainty. They have no idea whether the Supreme Court's going to overturn the tariffs.
Right.
They have no idea if Trump's going to change his mind next week. Right now, it doesn't matter. Honestly, they just want to know what's going on. If it's going to be high tariffs, then great, but they need to know. Because no business is planning out 2 to 3 weeks at a time. They're planning 6 months, 1 year, 2 years at a time.
So, Lindy, one of the things that I get to do in my kind of new life is provide advice to businesses that are trying to think about, like, what does the future look like? And I'll tell you, the number one thing I'm saying to all of them is, if your financial strategy is to just sit back and wait for the dust to settle, well, hold on, because we have 3.5 years. The dust is never going to settle. It is going to be like this all the time. And so the businesses that will survive and thrive are the ones that are nimble enough to manage the uncertainty that we live in today. Trump uses this uncertainty as a tool to gain leverage and power over other countries and folks who are both his adversaries or sometimes allies. This is how he operates. It is not going to change. And so I understand your perspective and your frustration about it. And what I offer you is simply this. That is how it is. Like, that is not going to change.
Okay,
and so
with all due respect, you're saying that American businesses should just suck it up and hemorrhage jobs.
No, I'm not saying to suck it up. I'm saying is approach this by recognizing the world in which you live. So, and this is just not going to surprise you, but kind of my political outlook has always been, I spend no time kind of like complaining and being upset about what I don't like. What I do is think, this is the situation we're in. What can I do to maximize my position? What can I do to solve for this? How do I recognize or deal with this climate that I'm in? Not wishing it was different, but just recognizing it for what it is. The last thing I'll say is this, and this is highly provocative. All of this data around jobs and this fluctuation is going to get even bigger as AI develops. AI is transforming the way that work will look in our country and around the globe. And so we are going to enter a period of disruption that is even greater than we are in now. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means that it's different. This AI revolution is going to change the way that we think and behave about work. And so those companies that thrive and survive are the ones that are willing and able to look at this new and changing environment and adapt to it.
I want to just play devil's advocate here for a second, because I appreciate what you're saying, Lindy, but my question would be, is part of the reason we're losing jobs things like AI and automation and greater efficiencies due to improving tech? Because there has been a 17.8% reshoring. Those things do take time. I pulled up a list of all the companies that are doing it. It's extensive. It's like automotive, GM, Nissan, Stellantis, in pharmaceutical, Eli Lilly, J&J, AstraZeneca, Novartis, Biogen, etc. Apple's reshoring, engineering, Airbnb. We got to give this some time, I would imagine. And in addition, I would say deals like we have with the EU, where they're buying $750 billion worth of energy from us. They're investing $600 billion in our country. Like, surely we got to give Trump a little credit here. I feel like we're just bashing the shit out of him.
I'm going to give him a lot of credit. I'm not that. By the way, I have been one of his fiercest advocates on this
I know
show.
you have. I'm saying we.
I just want to say that, but I'm also an investment banker. I've worked at Morgan Stanley. This is my wheelhouse. And so I'm a huge proponent of doing whatever gets us to, whatever strengthens our economy to the maximum degree. I'm going to give Trump credit on this. He has a tremendous, extraordinary talent to finagle deals out of tech titans. Yeah. We saw that with Tim Cook. He said thank you 7 times in 2 minutes. He said Apple would invest billions of dollars across a decade in the United States. Mark Zuckerberg, I think, said $600 billion over a decade. That is an astounding number. Joe Biden wasn't able to inspire the same level of investment and buy-in by these tech oligarchs. These people, whatever, Trump has this mystique, and these tech oligarchs are kissing his ring one by one. We see that happen again and again. We saw that in the inauguration. So hopefully they will actually, hopefully they will actually follow through with their promises. We see sometimes a lot of these times these promises don't pan out. For example, with the Taiwan semiconductor company, that famously they didn't really follow through. We'll see what happens with these promises of onshoring, as you said. We'll see if it actually pans out. But right now we are hemorrhaging jobs. It's not looking pretty. It's so bad that the Federal Reserve will probably lower interest rates by 25 to 50 basis points because they're concerned about the economy. We'll just see what happens right now. But I am in favor of a truly conservative policy. That means giving businesses an idea of what's going to happen and not changing policies on a weekly, even daily basis.
Right, but that's just not going to happen.
Well, I'm just saying that's not a good idea. That's not the proper way.
Yeah, I got to jump in, and I agree with Lindy wholeheartedly. Like, it's one thing to implement targeted tariffs, which Trump did do in his first term, and it actually ended up working out really, really well. And in fact, when Biden came in, he expanded on those targeted tariffs in China in particular. My problem with, okay, someone said like, oh, we're bashing Trump, and everyone's like, no, we're not bashing Trump. I'll bash Trump. I'll do that right now, because for me, his tariffs policy is not at all about bringing jobs back to America. What I've noticed with his widespread trade war with literally every country that he announced on Liberation Day is an effort to essentially coerce or apply pressure to various countries for different reasons, right? He's basically using tariffs as punishment toward countries if he doesn't get what he wants, whether it's through, their foreign policy, their personal investments in certain companies, or their military. Like, what it's doing is essentially serving as a cudgel as opposed to a mutually beneficial economic tool. And in the meantime, it absolutely is hurting the American economy. I mean, we're seeing it in the jobs reports, which Lindy thankfully outlined. I think Lindy's absolutely right about that. And, Kyrsten, you can argue, well, it just is what it is. It's not that big of a deal, but it is a big deal when you have growing inequality in the country, right?
I'm not saying it's not a big deal.
Okay, so what are the solutions, though, for not for businesses, but for Americans who are now losing their jobs because of this sluggish economy?
Yeah, I'm going to offer something that, I probably shouldn't even say this on a podcast, Jillian, so I want to apologize, but I'm not really that sorry, so I guess I'll just say what it is. That this conversation is an interesting conversation, but I don't think it matters that much because we're just a group of women talking about what we want. And what I'm trying to do is kind of situate us in what is. And I don't personally think it's super useful to spend a lot of time talking about what you wish or what you want. I think what is more useful is to acknowledge what is and then figure out what to do about it.
Okay, so we shouldn't have this podcast at all. Everyone should just
No. Hold on, because we do need to move on from this. But I understand what you're saying. Because my shrink says it to me all the time. Like we can sit there and wish and hope.
Intellectual discussions about the matters that.
Hold on. What she's trying to. What she's trying to say is that, listen, we can like it, we cannot like it, but this is the reality of what we're dealing with. So how do we adapt to it?
You're the one who won for the United States Senate. You are not one to resign yourself to the status quo, and I will not either. Americans are hurting right now. People are creating jobs right now. The AI dislocation is going to be so severe. It's going to be so bad. It'll blow your mind. In the meantime, we're making matters worse. And Anna, I just want to say every time I like you even more. Thank you for standing with me. This is a brave thing to do.
Well, you're right. You're right.
Criticizing Trump policy right now. It's
poor Amy. I gotta bring Amy in here. Hold on a second. Ames, you've been
I'm Switzerland over here.
I'm not. I'm gonna argue for Trump on this one. The girls are against. You're Switzerland. Ames, where are you?
I love it when Lindy and Anna get along. It's incredible. It's like goes over. It's amazing. Listen, this is a interesting one because on one hand, you have people saying that this is going to totally tank the economy. This is going to just destroy America, and Trump is acting with blatant disregard for how this is going to affect the people. And I hear what you're saying, Lindy, about the jobs report. But on the other hand, things are somewhat getting better financially. I mean, S&P continues to go to,
why though? Let me tell you exactly why the S&P 500
can I just finish my point and then just write it down and then come back to it. So that's one thing. It seems like we are actually improving. On the other hand, I also, knowing this personally firsthand and the way that it's impacting my family back home in Australia didn't do anything to warrant these attacks from Trump, to warrant these tariffs. Australia hasn't done anything. They're not cozying up to any trade partners until after Trump imposed these tariffs. Now it's directly pushing Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister, into the arms of Xi Jinping. So I think we also need to consider the way geopolitically these actions impact players on the world stage. Yeah, maybe Australia isn't a major world player, but them cozying up with China, that's not a good thing. In fact, in Australia right now, they actually just canceled posting due to how high the tariffs are. My family can't even send me birthday gifts over to America because
that's crazy.
The tariffs are. They've had to cut off posting. So, overall, I don't like this. I don't think that it's necessarily going to create the incentives that the administration wants. But by that same token, let's address the point about the stock market and how it seems.
Can I please? Amy, I love what you just said. Thank you. And having an Australian perspective on this was incredibly useful. Thank you. Let me tell you exactly why the S&P 500 is soaring. As someone, I'm an avid investor. Okay, I love the stock market and equities and ETFs, and I love this stuff. And the reason why we're seeing unprecedented highs is because investors know that Jerome Powell is going to be under tremendous pressure to lower interest rates finally by at least 25 basis points or to 50, depending on how bad inflation is. We're going to receive those numbers on Thursday. Everyone's watching very closely. And a lot of these gains are driven by the Magnificent Seven. For example, NVIDIA, Amazon, Google, all of these companies. It's not indicative of the broader economy. And one of the most important things, though, the primary beneficiaries of the stock market surge aren't the people that Trump is purporting to help. It's the wealthiest Americans. It's frankly people like me. We are the ones reaping the benefits, whereas the people, working class Americans, they are not invested in the stock market. In the meantime, they are losing jobs. Like Anna said, economic inequality is becoming extremely accentuated, even more so because of these policies. We should be focusing on them.
Yeah, and we have these conversations because the whole point is to have the American people figure out, like, what kind of leadership do we want in this country? Like, that's the whole point of having these types of dialogues. But Jillian, I'm curious what your defense is.
Here's where I stand on it. I think that, and we've talked about this before, we have trade asymmetries. Those should be resolved. Whether you appreciate his strategy or not, why would we have these economic imbalances and inefficiencies? Why don't other countries take trade imbalances on their end then if they're so fantastic? Then I would say, we've talked about national security issues, like with drugs, for example, pharmaceutical companies, energy independence, all of these different things we've talked about. I think you've seen he's done quite a few deals already. I mean, he's got phase.
But Jillian, he tends to exempt the pharmaceutical drugs that are being manufactured in other countries. In fact, his 50% tariff against India specifically exempts pharmaceutical drugs.
It's on energy to keep them from empowering Russia to continue. But
it's on all of their imports with the exception of pharmaceutical drugs. And I think maybe phones, if I'm not mistaken.
I thought in particular that the 50% increase was all about them buying oil from Russia.
That's what spurred the punishing 50% tariff. But the 50% tariff will be applied on all Indian imports to the United States with the exception of pharmaceutical drugs.
But I want to tie it back to what Anna just very ably said at the beginning of the segment.
Okay.
SCO Summit. You know why China is having such tremendous success on the global stage right now and why so many countries are flocking in their corner? It's because they're not doing this shit. They're not imposing
so many countries, guys. We still have the EU, we still have Canada, we still have Mexico, we still have Japan.
I'm just saying, Xi Jinping right now is talking to the world. He's saying, "I'm not going to do that to you. You're going to have predictability from me."
But at the same time, Trump needs a deterrent. I think this is obviously a powerful one. I don't disagree with you that there are room for improvements in the strategy. I do wish that he had given companies, let's say, a year, 18 months, and said, "I'm going to go after China. I'm going to go after them in a big way. Get your shit sorted out." Or he took on one territory at a time. I don't disagree that there could definitely be room for improvements with the strategy. I'm simply saying I think he needs to utilize tariffs for the reasons we discussed, national security issue, for these economic imbalances, for reshoring and all of those things, and as a major deterrent against Russia being able to continue going after Ukraine. So I just think, and he's had huge successes. I just brought up the EU deal where they're going to buy $750 billion worth of energy from us and invest $600 billion in the country. Like, there are things, and 17.8% reshoring. There are things we're not giving him credit for. I think we're just bashing him across the board. That'd be my
I can talk about all the things that I really support him on. I'm just saying on this one in particular, I don't think it's conducive to the American people. The very working people that he's trying to be a champion for. I think there are more surgical ways to do that rather than this like broad brush, hammer everything with the
strategy could be improved, Senator.
Well, this is a little bit of a self-indulgent conversation here because I don't think that President Trump is going to be listening to this. And he might be. He might be an avid listener of her take. And if he is, that's awesome. But I suspect that maybe he's not. And so I guess, I tend to spend my time in the world, again, like I keep saying, of what is. And in the world of what is, I think what would be useful to do right now is think, what is it that we as Americans who are involved in commerce or involved in kind of work with major companies, what do we do in this situation? How do we adapt? How do we manage and be nimble in this environment in which we live? To me, that is a more useful discussion than the discussion of like what you like and what you don't like.
Okay, what are your solutions?
You need to thoroughly assess the situation, right? You need to discuss the issues at hand. You need to discuss.
So according to your logic, we shouldn't have this podcast at all. We shouldn't be.
No. That's not what
Not
you're
at all.
saying.
But what are the solutions?
I can relate to this.
Go ahead. The floor is yours. What are the solutions? How do we
I've
adapt?
dealt with it personally. Let me just say this. So for all the companies that Giancarlo and I, my business partner and I, are either in business with or invest in, we've experienced it firsthand, whether it's a supplement company that gets collagen from Brazil or whether it's a treadmill company that manufactures in China. I mean, we've experienced it across the board, and we are having to buy a ton of inventory in advance. We are having to, relocate manufacturing to Vietnam, for example. You're having to be nimble. It's a bit of a pain in the ass, without question, but we don't sit here and bitch about it all day long. We are acting independently and aggressively to safeguard our companies in some of the ways that I mentioned. But Senator, what do you recommend to the people that you're working with?
Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, one of the first things I recommend is to just get used to this. Like, this is how it is going to be. It is not going to change. It's not going to settle down. You can't wait 6 months and be like, oh, things will go back to normal. This is the new normal. Okay. So that's number one, is like wrapping your head around it. And then number two is thinking about how you can build in resiliency within your own business and your industry. So Jillian, I love the examples that you gave around the kind of the nimbleness of your own production, your own supply chains. Like, what are you doing to build in that resilience? One of the challenges I think that we have of this kind of global world that we live in right now is that we've become so heavily dependent at various elements of the supply chain on companies who don't share our core values or share our vision for what a world could or should look like. And so the exercise, though painful at the moment, the exercise of reconsidering how to deal with these supply chains and become more resilient is actually a really important exercise. This is something, Jillian, I'm actually working on in other areas. I think you know a little bit about the work we're starting to do on regenerative farming, which is a whole other issue I hope we get to talk a little bit about. But one of the things that we saw in COVID was the incredible fragility of our food supply chain, right? Like when COVID hit, meat factories in Iowa, we didn't have meat in the entire country because there's only 4 places where you get it from. And that fragility that became so evident to us during COVID still exists today. And so, Jillian, when you were talking about you and your business partner making those adjustments, that's not just in relation to tariffs or a rapidly shifting public policy marketplace. It's also about kind of the larger issue of globalization and the fragility of our supply chains. What is it that we can do as individuals and as companies to create that resiliency so that we are less dependent on outside volatile sources? So I would love to go on a deep dive around like food and MAHA and regenerative farming as an example of how to address this. But it's true in manufacturing. When you talk about your collagen supplements, why are we getting our collagen from, would you say Bolivia?
Brazil. We get it from Brazil because we don't get it from China.
Why aren't we getting our collagen from the United States of America?
We don't manufacture enough. It's a very, again, this is a sidebar conversation where I'd love to talk with you about it.
Kyrsten, you know who else says
I got to move us on in a minute. So final thoughts on this, but it's a lot to think about.
Kyrsten, respectfully, you know who else says we shouldn't talk about something because it's a done deal and there's nothing we can talk about? Authoritarian regimes. That person's going to get murdered anyway, or you're going to lose your livelihood. We shouldn't discuss it. There's nothing we can do. We shouldn't talk about it. Let's just move on. Nothing to see here.
Yeah, that's incredibly offensive. So just want to point out,
I'm from an authoritarian regime because you're saying that we should not even discuss these issues because we can't.
Not at all what I said.
Is that your point?
Not at all what I said.
Why is that offensive?
What I said was that I don't spend my time personally talking about what I want or what I don't want. I spend my time assessing what is and then determining what to do about it. So that's just a difference of opinion. But just to be clear, I do not support authoritarian regimes. In fact,
I never said you supported authoritarian
okay.
regimes. Please
So,
don't put words
as
in
you
my
all know, during my 20
Okay,
years
we're gonna
public
move on because
service,
this is not
independent.
productive.
Yeah, thanks, Jillian.
Let's move on because here's where we are right now on a completely separate topic that does involve authoritarian regimes. The U.S. military just carried out an operation against a suspected Venezuelan drug cartel boat, which was an action ordered to destroy the vessel rather than simply intercept it. So now, of course, supporters are saying this sends a strong message of deterrence to traffickers and the Maduro regime. It shows that Washington is willing to act decisively against drug networks. But of course, critics are warning that it could mark the start of a broader escalation. Are we getting involved in regime change? Is there a secret motive going on here? Lindy, take us through what's happening with this, please.
Thank you, Jill. I'm actually with Trump on this. Again, I really just try to be fair and try to assess every individual situation. And I do think that we should be more aggressive in terms of the policies that we take to prevent drugs from flowing into this country. And we've been dealing with Venezuela for a number of years. Although this probably could have been handled a little bit better with a little bit more finesse, I think the larger goal is a valid one, which is to prevent Americans from dying from the fentanyl, from the drugs pouring into the country. So what happened, Connor, I don't know if you want to throw up the New York Times snippet that I have. Obviously, they are freaking out as usual. The New York Times, the reliable chorus of Trump haters, they are saying that Trump does not have a legal authority to do this. And I think Pete Hegseth, actually, Anna, you brought up this point that Pete Hegseth, our Secretary of Defense, has made it very clear that his ultimate goal is regime change. And this also ties back to the tariffs thing. Anna, you also brought this up, that Trump is using tariffs on every single country for a different reason. And he is using tariffs on Venezuela in particular because he wants regime change, which is very interesting because tariffs should primarily be used as an economic cudgel rather than as one size fits all, in my opinion. Although I agree with, and I want to hear your ladies' opinion on this, although I agree with Trump's renewed push, and for example, he's also working against China in this regard, I agree with his intense push against drugs. I'm not sure if using tariffs as a weapon on this issue is the most effective approach.
Right.
And I also want to bring up that J.D. Vance has been extremely unapologetic on this matter. He had this amazing exchange with an influencer named Brian Krasenstein of the Krasenstein twins. And he's just not backing down at all. He's doubling down on this. And I think this is kind of, in Americans' eyes, they don't really know too much about the nuance, the intricacies of the situation. They just see the president coming down hard on people who wish to do Americans harm. And so they see the top line. And the lead is that J.D. Vance and President Trump, they are being very aggressive towards the people who are smuggling drugs into this country. So I am a little bit ambivalent on this policy, but I do appreciate Trump's renewed push on drugs coming into this country.
Who's against this? Who doesn't like it in the group? Ames, what do you think?
Well, the legality component, him redesignating the drug cartels as terrorist organizations, is essentially what makes this legal at the end of the day, right? Assuming it was that, then yes, I'm all for it. The issue is that what they're using is like a trust me bro kind of strategy, that these were definitely drug smugglers. And this is the same administration that said, trust me, bro, there aren't any more Epstein files. This is a hoax. And then proceeded to release like 33,000 new pages, which we're going to be covering next. They've shown time and time again, trust but verify. Unfortunately, they didn't give us any mechanism to verify whether this was in fact a drug cartel boat. Assuming it was, then yes, I'm all for it. But at the same time, if I'm thinking strategically multiple steps ahead, it almost seems like they did this to kind of goad Venezuela into getting on the offense towards the USA, because then they can attack back and instigate their regime change. And one thing that I want to say before I hand it off is, I'm concerned about this because we've already seen what the repercussions of this are on a wider scale back in 2019. And all of the following Venezuelan immigrants that poured into this country that we
Good point.
complained about. You know, Trump launched a very, very strong campaign. Well, it wasn't his campaign, but, you know, basically trying to attack Maduro, their leader. And as a result, it destabilized a large part of the nation, and plenty of Venezuelan refugees ended up coming over here. Now we complain about it.
That's such a good point.
Isn't the same thing more than likely going to occur, especially if we launch a full-on regime change war?
What Trump has effectively done is he has married the war on terror with the war on drugs, which were both disastrous. Okay, absolutely disastrous. So when it comes to, like, let's say you're going to take what Trump is saying about this strike on that boat at face value, and that this is all just about fighting the drug war. Well, first of all, Venezuela is not a, supplier or top supplier of the very drugs that we're having problems with here in the United States, namely fentanyl, which is sourced in China, processed in Mexico, and comes across the border. Attacking a ship without identifying the targets, meaning here's the people that we knew without a shadow of a doubt are drug traffickers, they're causing all sorts of problems. I have an issue with that. But I also have an issue with the fact that we didn't do what we typically do with a suspected, drug trafficking boat, which is you intercept the boat, you confirm that the individuals in that boat are in fact, bad actors, and you bring them to justice. But that didn't happen here. And I personally feel uncomfortable with one branch of our federal government just pointing at any boat, any person, calling them a terrorist or a drug trafficker, which are now considered terrorists under the Trump administration, and then just blowing them out of the water, literally. But the bigger issue here, guys, is even though at the moment Trump is denying that this is really about toppling Nicolas Maduro, the fact of the matter is there's currently a U.S. military buildup off the coast of Venezuela, which, by the way, includes a submarine. It includes more than 2,000 U.S. Marines. U.S. Marines are usually deployed for boots on the ground. In my mind, this isn't really about fighting the drug war. It's about toppling Nicolas Maduro, and we might engage in a hot war with them pretty soon, which I don't think is in the best interest of the United States. The final thing I'll say about this is there is a financial incentive to topple Nicolas Maduro because the United States knows that Venezuela has literally the largest oil reserve on the globe. So I'm worried about how this is going to develop. And I think that the drug war is simply the cover story to it.
Senator?
So 3 points, kind of historical reference. Number one, the United States government has been doing this for years. The difference is the Trump administration said it out loud. In the past, it happened through, Delta forces or SEAL Team 6 or under the CIA's cover. And we just kind of didn't talk about it, that we were doing it. And so that's really the key difference here is that in this instance, the president and vice president were like, yep, that was us. And we're not sorry about it. But if you go back and take a look at modern American history, this is not unusual activity. It's just usually covert. Okay, so that's point number one. Point number two, we're not great at regime change, right?
No.
We've done it a lot and we usually F it up. And so that's something that I think many Americans have some concern and hesitancy about is maybe this is about regime change and then we should be maybe nervous about that because we're really bad at regime change. And usually kind of the follow after effects are not great for us or for other countries. And then point number three, I do think that Americans have legitimate concerns around the drug trafficking that's happening globally, not just the fentanyl, which the precursors come from China. It's manufactured in Mexico. As you probably know, 85% of it comes through Arizona into the country. It's created a horrible epidemic in our country. I mean, Americans have been touched by this. They care about it. They also care about kind of the larger narco trafficking in the world because it hurts their families. So while it may not all be about drugs, these kinds of dangerous drugs are hurting Americans every single day. So there's some legitimacy to Americans' concerns about that. What does that mean as we move forward? I think it's too early to tell. We might see kind of a legal avenue where there's maybe some kind of discussion in the courts around the action taken by the administration, the fact that it was overt rather than covert, could come up in the courts, could be settled. It also may not come up in the courts, and this just becomes a new norm for the government. It's unlikely that Congress takes any action to like stop the administration from doing this because of the aforementioned, gridlock, partisan gridlock in Congress. But I do think that you're going to continue to see some kind of concern around Americans, both around global drug trafficking, but also concern around regime change. I don't believe there's an appetite with the American people for us to have a boots on the ground war. Like Americans.
I do that 100%. I do want to say though, just because we've been doing it for decades doesn't mean that we should keep on doing it. The status quo.
I agree. The point I wanted to make was just the historical reality that this is not novel or new. What is novel is the saying it out loud part.
Right, because when I looked into the history of this, it has been going on for years and years and years, all different kinds of sanctions and actions against Venezuela, so on and so forth. I want to be the advocate here, just to think about and to throw it out to all of you. You brought up some great points, which is drug trafficking is a huge problem. The cartels are running our border like $1 billion business. Actually, a multi-billion dollar. I undersold that significantly. It is a huge problem. I want to give Trump credit for closing the border, lowering fentanyl deaths significantly. I do think we have to go after these guys. They're exceptional bad actors. And as we've spoken about before, it's not just drugs, it's also human trafficking in particular. I would say he's trying to control energy. That was a note that I have here is, all right, you brought it up, Anna.
Yeah, this is about oil for sure.
And you know what? Yeah. You're right, and I get it. But is there any part of you that would say, all right, maybe we need to grab control of that, given all the things we've already talked about?
So you could either engage in a regime change war to essentially take control of Venezuela's resources. And I not only find that immoral, I think that, as Kyrsten Sinema just mentioned, usually we F it up. And I don't want to risk American soldiers. I don't want boots on the ground for that, because there are other possibilities. So with Venezuela, I would rather not destabilize them, create another, mass migrant crisis issue that will affect the United States, that will affect the globe. Is there a way that we can approach this diplomatically? I mean, Trump likes to talk about how he's a big deal maker and how he's a man of peace. How about instead of trying to topple Maduro and install some weird puppet, leader like Juan Guaido, which is what he tried to do in his first term, is there a way that Trump can make an economic deal, a diplomatic deal with Nicolas Maduro? I understand his disdain for Maduro. I understand how he disagrees with Maduro ideologically. But the fact of the matter is the United States disagrees ideologically with many of our trade partners. So if we're going to be part of this global economy and engage in a way that mitigates or minimizes war, death, destabilization, mass migrant issues, I think pursuing diplomacy is far better.
Amen. And Anna, just to back you up a little bit, you said we usually F it up. We don't usually F it up. We always F it up, to be very clear. And remember what happened? Wait, Jillian, I have to say this. I know you're like upset, disagreeing.
I'm not upset. I'm not upset. I'm trying to present both sides of it. I
said at the top that I'm actually sympathetic to Trump's targeted war on drugs. I just do have some concerns about the delivery. We literally did this before. We don't have to wonder what happens when we go into a regime. We aim for regime change in order to acquire the oil reserves. We did this in 2003. You know where? In Iraq. All right. We did it in 2000. In the 2000s, it didn't work well. It took us decades to get out. Yeah. We shouldn't be going into places for regime change in order to.
We don't know yet that we are. The question is,
you asked that question whether we should. You just asked Anna that.
No, I'm asking if we should take actions of some sort to try to gain control of this region. And I appreciate that we all want diplomacy, but on the other hand, you also have to kind of speak softly, but carry your big stick. Is the big stick a warning? Is it a shot across the bow? Is it these, as you mentioned, Senator, we've been doing this for a really long time. Now we're just being transparent about doing it. I don't disagree with you that with everybody here that we've failed in these regime changes and it's a mess. But is there some sort of like, hey, we're going to club you over the head if you don't get in line? And I do think we're kind of conflating two things. And one is the war on cartels and drugs, and the other one is regime change. Or it seems like a lot of us are for going after these bad guys. And I appreciate you want more due process there. I think you're being naive. I think we know who these guys are.
I
No?
didn't say I need them to go on trial and convict them before there are consequences. They didn't even identify they killed 11 people. We don't know
They
if they're members of
absolutely
a drug.
identify them, though. They absolutely
didn't.
confirmed.
You have their names?
You're telling me that our government did not confirm that they
We
know
actually
who
didn't.
was-
We did not intercept.
but we
But I do
literally
want to
didn't.
diverge a little bit here.
Okay,
But
so
Anna's right. We didn't.
we didn't
what?
We didn't
stop them to
confirm-
verify the identities. We didn't do that. That's actually part of the.
Did we stop Osama bin Laden when we broke in his house and shot him? We were like,
but did
excuse
these
me,
11
are you
people-
Osama bin
did these
Laden, or do
11
we have
people,
some confidence?
hijack our?
You're telling me you have no confidence in the CIA?
No, wait. I'm actually with you,
Lindy,
Jillian, on this. Can I make this
come
point? I'm
on.
actually with you. Let me finish this.
Okay,
The
sorry, go
danger
ahead.
of intercepting, though, is it endangers Americans. Like if we were to get on that ship, on that vessel, that would have endangered American lives. That is a Hegseth argument. I'm actually sympathetic to that. But we didn't do it, Jillian. We just didn't.
You're telling me you truly believe we don't know who was in the boat?
No,
that
that's
we
not
don't
what
have
I'm
the
saying.
intelligence to believe-
Verify. We just didn't.
There
We didn't
could've
go on the boat and verify there were actually drugs on there. That didn't happen.
You
I'm saying
okay?
I'm with you, though.
I think that you guys are greatly underestimating our intelligence agencies, and
No, I'm just telling
confident
you,
we knew who was on the boat.
Wait,
I don't
Jillian,
think we
you're
just blew up.
misunderstanding me. Those were drug dealers, traffickers, 100%. But we didn't go on the boat. We didn't board the ship to verify that there were drugs on board. That didn't happen.
Who's to say that maybe one of their girlfriends, or maybe someone that they were human trafficking along with the drug trafficking, or something
Amy,
like that?
you guys are you kidding? Do you know how many of these drone strikes we've conducted throughout every single administration, and how many innocents
and those
have
drone
been?
I'm with
strikes
you.
have
I'm
been a
just saying that we
disaster.
didn't verify the identities.
I hope you're right, Jillian, but wouldn't they proudly brandish their names then on every single article related to this and exactly who these people were? And
Okay, Senator, you would know how this works a little better than me. Am I being naive here, or can I have confidence that our intelligence agencies knew who was on the boat?
Yeah, they knew who was on the boat.
No, we're not disputing that, Jillian. I'm with you. I agree with you. What I'm saying is that we didn't get on the boat to verify that 100%.
Yeah.
And
All right.
that's why
I
people
think
were-
you guys are being naive. I have confidence that we knew who was on the boat. Maybe we didn't. Maybe I'm
I just
wrong.
said I agree with you.
Well, but okay. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm taking us
Could
off.
I
I'm taking us
offer-
off piece.
Could I offer
Yeah.
what you just said, Jillian, is that doesn't matter. And so move along. Let's move along.
Jesus
All right,
Christ, man. That is the most unhinged shit I've ever heard in my life. It doesn't
Anna,
matter.
thank
Let's
you.
move on.
Now,
Let's
I'm
fucking
saying,
move
What
on.
is the point of
What
having
is
why
What
are
I'm saying is
innocent
it
people-
doesn't matter.
No,
It doesn't matter that 5 women on a podcast are
that
debating
is-
whether or
so
not
why
you're
are you
voting.
on the
Doesn't
show?
matter, okay,
If it
we're
doesn't matter.
Americans and we're
Okay,
engaging
let me-
political policy in a democracy, Kyrsten Sinema. It does matter. It matters what the American people think. Whether they agree or disagree on this issue, as Americans, we have the right to discuss it, and it fucking matters. Don't say it doesn't matter. If you don't think it matters, then get off the show. Why are we
Yes,
talking
Jillian,
about
I
it?
fucking love you. I love you because
It's
America
ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. This is probably why you were such a
Exactly.
disaster in the
It's such a
Senate.
Okay,
privilege
all
to
right,
be able
guys,
to talk about
guys,
this and
let's
not get
not- okay,
arrested.
hold on.
Do you know
Let's
how
not-
beautiful that is? Most people around
Guys.
the world can't have these discussions, and now you're just tossing away that privilege like it doesn't even matter. Why are you here today?
All right. Let's be respectful of the guests. We're allowed to disagree on all of these
I'll be
things.
respectful
obviously.
to guests that are respectful to us. I'll just say that.
I think the point,
Thank
and
you.
I hear you guys, and I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, I think the point that the senator is trying to make is that these are the realities of the world we're living in. And yes, and I see what you're saying. Like, we need to discuss it. People need to know who they're voting for. We need to advocate for certain policies. So we got a tough one, and I really do want to get to this, and I want to hear from Amy a bit more today. So, Ames, I'm just going to throw this up. I'm not even going to set it up. You already know what you're doing here, and we're short on time. Get to me on the latest on Epstein, please. What's going on here? There's a lot happening.
All right, I got you. So,
It doesn't really matter, Amy. Does it
no,
really
it
matter?
doesn't, and that probably makes
Let's
sense.
go home.
That probably makes sense why it was requested that we don't cover this subject. But I think it matters, and personally, seeing the fact that the Trump administration has said, "Stop talking about Epstein. You are not my supporter. Go convert to Democrat if you want to talk about Epstein." I think that usually when people tell you to look the other way and they do that so persistently, it usually means that there's something that we should evaluate a little bit further. Now, as we know, this cover-up has been going on for about 3 months now. Congress went and they took their recess, and I bet when they went away, they were hoping that everybody would just forget all about it, that we would be consumed with some other issue that would take preference in our mind, and we would stop talking about Epstein and we would stop caring about it. But fortunately, that did not happen. And Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna have been leading the initiative on this thing, really since this whole scandal broke out as soon as Trump called it a Democratic hoax. So last week, we actually saw the biggest news week when it comes to Epstein, basically since the year 2019. And that is in the sense that the DOJ actually dropped 33,000 documents pertaining to the Epstein files. More on that in a minute. We also saw that Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna officially launched their Epstein Files Transparency Act. And to launch that, they actually held a press conference and private briefing at the Capitol with the survivors. So let's go ahead and start with the documents. Now, this one is really particularly interesting to me because they said that this was a hoax and there weren't any more documents. There wasn't any other evidence available. And yet, the day before the press conference and the private briefing was due to be held, they do this massive drop of documents, almost as if to say, hey guys, we don't need the Epstein Files Transparency Act because look at us, look at all of our transparency here. But let's call it what it is. This was absolutely not an act of goodwill. This was their attempt to divert focus away from Massie and Ro Khanna's initiative. And not only that, but the documents that they released were basically repeats. I mean, many of them were still heavily redacted. It was basically a load of BS. So first and foremost, Connor, let's go ahead and play the video of Ro Khanna on Fox News discussing that, please.
The House Oversight Committee tonight making more than 33,000 pages of the Jeffrey Epstein case records public. CNN has them. We've been going through them as we speak. So far, we've determined that they contain flight logs and court filings and surveillance footage. Now, there's reason to believe these are the materials the panel received from the Justice Department a little more than a week ago, which you'll remember Democratic Committee member Ro Khanna said was just a fraction of what the DOJ actually has.
Our lawyers were up all night, and we now have a fact that only 3% of the documents that were given to us were new. 97% were already in the public domain. And less than 1% of the Epstein files have actually been released.
There you go. So this is exactly why Massie and Ro Khanna filed for the Epstein Files Transparency Act, because it's essentially going to order the declassification of every single government record pertaining to Jeffrey Epstein, aside from those that would implicate the victims' identities. So that's documents ranging from the CIA, the DOJ, the FBI, and the State Department. And here's the kicker, is they actually paired it with a strategic maneuver. It's called a discharge position, which essentially, if the leadership tries to bury the bill, 218 signatures will force a floor vote, which will basically make everybody go on the record. So, you know, we can look back on this and see who was on the wrong side of history, who was trying to cover their tracks, who was trying to, you know, protect their house, essentially, because that's what's happening. And then on September 3rd, lawmakers brought Epstein survivors to the Capitol to put real faces to the fight, you know, in hopes that this would really kickstart the initiative and canvass for the signatures that they need to make this discharge position a reality. And so survivors stood shoulder to shoulder with Massie, Khanna, Anna Paulina Luna, and others, basically demanding that those in Congress sign. And we saw that, for example, Nancy Mace, she walked out of the private briefing in tears. She was visibly shaken and upset. We can go ahead and play that clip, please, Connor, if you have it there. I mean, that moment says a lot, and obviously the stories were extremely devastating. We do have a video here available, which is a snippet from the press conference where we can hear directly from one of the Epstein survivors herself. If we could play that, please, Connor.
I was just one of the many young women trapped in his orbit. I was even taken on a trip to Africa with former President Bill Clinton and other notable figures. In those moments, I realized how powerless I was. If I spoke out, who would believe me? Who would protect me? Epstein himself was the most powerful leader of our country. Epstein surrounded himself, with the most powerful leaders of our country and the world. He abused not only me, but countless others, and everyone seemed to look away. The truth is, Epstein had a free pass. He bragged about his powerful friends, including our current president, Donald Trump. It was his biggest brag, actually. And what I endured will haunt me forever.
So, guys, as of last week, the petition has 206 signatures. So basically, every single Democrat has signed. And then on the Republican side, we have Massey, we have Ro Khanna, we have Lauren Boebert, Nancy Mace, and Marjorie Taylor Greene. So there are still 2 more signatures that are required for the Republican side. I want to play Marjorie Taylor Greene's video in a moment where she's explaining why she put her signature down. And obviously she has kind of diverged from the Trump administration on many things, particularly when it comes to any views on Israel and the way our foreign policy may be influenced, by that specific government. But before we do that, I just want to go on a little mini rant and say just how frustrating this is, simply by the fact that the Trump administration campaigned on releasing these files, and yet now the Trump administration is the biggest bottleneck in ever having this information see the light of day. It's just so contradictory. And the fact that they really riled up the American people and, galvanized the conservative base, saying that we're going to get you the answers to these things. And then not only did they not give us the answers, but they called us stupid for asking for them, for believing them, when they're the ones who goaded us and basically campaigned on it, leading all the way up until Trump got elected. And not only that, but they tried to fake the fact that they did something about it with their ridiculous influencer stunt. Epstein Files Phase 1, where there was absolutely no information in there, and what was in there was heavily redacted. Yet these influencers are proudly taking their pictures before even verifying what's inside of them. Like, I see through the farce. I think it's pretty obvious to everybody exactly what's going on. But Connor, let's go ahead and play this clip from Marjorie Taylor Greene, please, explaining why she is signing this.
It's because Jeffrey Epstein somehow was able to walk among the most rich, powerful people, not only in America, but foreign countries. Yesterday, I heard countries like Saudi Arabia, Russia, and even Israel, and other countries. The truth needs to come out.
All right, I think we're good there. So, essentially, guys, there was also a CNN article. It's really important that we mention that too, because you may be wondering, well, where's all the Republicans? Why aren't they voting? I quote here, they actually said, a White House official said that helping Massey and Democrats with their attention seeking, while the DOJ is fully supporting a more comprehensive file release effort from the Oversight Committee, would be viewed as a very hostile act against the administration. So
why?
Exactly. Well, I possibly we know why. After the press conference, we also saw Anna Paulina Luna come out and say something that all of us have really known, or at least speculated about for a long time. So we can go ahead and play that video, please, Connor.
There's some very rich and powerful people that need to go to jail. I think everyone's been frustrated as to why that hasn't happened before. But it is very much so a possibility that Jeffrey Epstein was an intelligence asset working for our adversaries. But also, too, I think the questions that we have is how much did our own government know about it? And so there's more to follow, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from the chairman momentarily. But I do applaud the victims from coming forward, because we heard from a woman who was as young as 14 years old.
So obviously it's very hostile, because not only does this implicate, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, but potentially governments, and the fact that our government was working with other governments. This makes it on such a bigger scale that, of course, this would be deemed a hostile act to the administration. Just one more thing I want to mention before I throw it over to you ladies. Something really hilarious was obviously Mike Johnson coming out. and saying that Trump was an FBI informant. I think he said during, when all of this was initially being prosecuted in 2019, and then Lindy, you sent to our group chat last night. He walked it back. Is that right?
He did. So ridiculous. One thing that I also want to add that broke over the weekend. So apparently the DOJ says that the names of 2 Epstein associates who he wired $100,000 to and $250,000 to should remain a secret. And I want to know why. Yeah, so the Justice Department request came after NBC News asked a federal judge to unseal the names of 2 people Epstein paid and helped protect from prosecution. So again, those 2 people, one of them, it was an associate of his who received $100,000. And then the second associate received $250,000, both in 2018, days after the Miami Herald began publishing a series of investigative stories where victims criticized a plea deal he received in Florida in 2008. Wow, why is the DOJ protecting co-conspirators of Epstein's?
I mean, that's a really good question.
But you guys know why. You guys know why. I mean, Amy just said it. It's everything we already know. The guy was intelligence, and no one's going to tell us that, oh yeah, our government and other governments use children as sex slaves to leverage power. No one's going to tell us that, guys. And I think when people push back, why do you want to know? Why do you care? Why does it matter? Move on. Well, that's one, justice for the victims, but 2, because whatever the hell is going on with this, it is pure evil. And one would hope that sunlight would disinfect this and prevent it from ever happening again. But I think that is the reason we're never going to know. And last thought on this, and I didn't mean to hijack this, I apologize, but the last thought is what you said, Amy, when it's like, well, why did they just release the 3 minutes of video? I thought it didn't exist. How come we just got 30,000 more documents? What happened when Bongino and Patel sat there and like, nothing to see? No, killed himself. We're good. We've released everything. Everything's good here. Well, then why'd you hold back this stuff? It just, none of this makes any sense. And I think the reason it doesn't make sense is because it is a huge lever of power for intelligence agencies, a variety of different countries around the world. That's what is just so gross, in my opinion.
Amy, I just want to say that was so well done. Incredibly impressed. That was extremely comprehensive. And I want to point you to something. I don't know if you saw, again, you did that so well, but did you see the clip of the press conference and the fighter jets were flying across as the women were trying to talk and name names? Did you see that?
Yeah.
Like they couldn't even get the word out because the fighter jets were so loud. I mean, it was perfectly timed. So that's something to look into. And something else that Anna brought up this weekend with a group, Anna, do you want to talk about the quote? One of the ladies said that people who are implicated are in the cabinet.
Oh, that's right.
That's right.
You sent that, right?
I don't have it in front of me though. I want to read the exact quote. Do you have it by any chance?
I do. It was, we've been texting a lot. I thought it was Anna had the good sense to send this. This was in the Ghislaine Maxwell transcript with Todd Blanche.
Yes.
She said verbatim, if you met Epstein, there is no way that this cast of characters, of which is extraordinary, and some are in your cabinet, who you value as your coworkers. Bear in mind that she's talking with the second highest ranking official at the Department of Justice, after which she was moved to a lower security prison, actually with Elizabeth Holmes. So a lot of victims are now very upset that she is receiving preferential treatment after her interview with Todd.
Well, go ahead.
I just a couple very quick points. One, a discharge petition is really, really hard to get 218 signatures on in the House. Very hard, because it requires not only bipartisan cooperation, but it, as you noted articulately, it requires kind of going against leadership in whichever party is in charge. You know, I served in the House for 6 years, and never once during my time in those 6 years did a discharge petition make it to the floor. So the fact that they are within 2 or 3 signatures of getting this discharge petition done is a big, big deal. So I want to say, you know, big props to Massey in particular for getting that far. It's very difficult to do. Number two, once the discharge petition does get 218, it's not like the vote's going to happen right away. There's still a lot that leadership can do in terms of like stretching out when the vote's going to happen. It's like the first Tuesday of a month, and it's, you know, so it can still take a long time to get this to a vote. So I think that's important for people to know that once they hit the 218, it doesn't mean it's going to happen right away. There's still a lot of kind of bureaucracy and tools that leadership can use to delay the vote. And then number three, I would say, you know, there's kind of two schools of thought that are happening in the House right now. There's the Sunshine is Disinfectant group, right? So that's like the Thomas Massie group. And then there's the group that says, well, we should disclose what the judiciary says or what the DOJ says is appropriate to disclose. Those are two very different political perspectives and positions. And so it'll be interesting to see what actually happens. You know, I tend to come from the more Tulsi Gabbard philosophy here, which is like, Sunshine is the disinfectant. Just get it all out there. Let people see what it is.
Senator, can you game out for me the other perspective of like, let's just release what the what is the logic there other than to hide really evil shit? What am I missing?
So first of all, let me just say, I think that most members of Congress who hold that perspective, what I would call the more kind of conservative, I don't mean that with a big C. I mean like, you know, traditional conservative perspective, like don't disclose everything. Those aren't all bad people, right? Like members are good people, just like all of us. But if they're being told by the administration or by leadership to not disclose everything for undisclosed reasons, many people are going to say yes to that because that is how authority and leadership works in our country. You know, one of the reasons that that I was known for being me was that I just wasn't good at saying yes to what leadership told me to do. And so, you know, that's unusual. That's an unusual trait. And it doesn't last for longevity, right? So many people just trust their leadership. And again, I don't want to be disrespectful in any way to those individuals because these are people I care about and my friends. But they're probably being told, my guess, that there are national security reasons or there are other reasons for which you don't want to have complete and total disclosure. And again, I would say the corollary I would kind of reflect you towards is what Tulsi is doing as the Director of National Intelligence. Full disclosure, Tulsi and I came into Congress together. We're very good friends. What she's doing in terms of like declassifying information, showing the history of stuff, that is very controversial to do as a member of the cabinet. But what she's doing is, I think, what the American people want and deserve. And so, again, going back to like your points around kind of the differing perspectives, it's really like Sunshine is disinfectant, or you know, leadership has reasons that are not disclosed that they don't want this shown.
Trust me,
I mean,
bro.
and also look at Thomas Massie. Look at the war that has been waged on Thomas Massie, one of the only, if not the only, genuine, not bought and paid for Republican members serving in Congress right
True
now.
libertarian.
Yeah, they're launching the full force of APAC, of, you know, everything against this man. And it's kind of like a warning shot to everybody else in the Republican Party, all the other members of Congress, that, hey, you want to step out of line. Like you said, it can be a dangerous thing to do. You don't stick around very long when you oppose leadership. You know that firsthand. And so don't you think all of these other Republicans are looking at Thomas Massie, looking at the war that's being waged against him, and they're like, well, I don't want to step out of line. You know,
Amy, that's exactly right. And in this case, there's an additional catalyst, and it's the threat that the victims are making. If Congress doesn't step up, we're going to release our own list. They've been saying,
I love that. That is very cool.
Incredibly powerful, and it hasn't been vocalized before. And honestly, I hope they do.
Sunshine is the disinfectant. Right?
All right, I'm going to move us on. Unless we have any final thoughts, we have to express on this one. And I think we've got time for one more, unless I get a text from our producer here saying no.
I think we got to close out, no?
Yes, because
just turn your phone over, Jillian. Then you don't get the text.
I know. All right, Justin, am I moving on, or am I doing the Florida vaccine situation? Let's see what I get back. Am I closing? Hold on. We should be closing soon. Wait, gotta wrap. All right, we gotta wrap. That's a bummer. Senator, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can we get more from you?
Well, you know, I'm sorry that we didn't get onto the conversation, the last one, because I really wanted to spend some time talking about Commissioner McCarry, the new FDA commissioner. He is phenomenal. And I could talk for a long time about some of the work he's doing. Again, sunshine is disinfectant, but also the work he's doing to really help us think more clearly around health and medicine in our country, which I would love to spend more time talking about. I guess the last thing I'll say, since we have to wrap up, is this. If you haven't read Commissioner Makari's book, Blind Spots, go do so. I would love to spend some time talking about the work that's happening at HHS and FDA around the MAHA movement, around health, around changing the way that we think about medicine. I'd love to talk about psychedelic medicine. I'd love to talk about farming. I mean, there's so much more I want to talk about.
I know.
So
Yeah.
I guess
We always get into the political stuff here, and we never get into the Maha stuff. But you and I can have a sidebar conversation
we'll
maybe on
sidebar
my
about
show,
it.
and we can dig in on kind of I tend to lean into that stuff a bit more, but the girls have so much to share that's political and topical and current. So maybe you and I could dig into it.
I would love it. I would love it.
On a sidebar later day.
So before we close, I guess what I'll say is it's just been a real honor and a privilege to be with you, and I appreciate the conversation, and I do respect all of the voices that are here today, despite the fact that we disagree on some issues. I know that I'm a little unusual, but I will say this. I appreciate a diversity of opinions. It is what makes our country great and is what we need in order to maintain a vibrant democracy. So thank you.
Anna, where can we get more?
You can ask me questions over at Manect, and you can find me over at youtube.com/theyoungturks.
Lynn?
I'm Lindy Lee on Manect and everywhere else. Thanks, guys.
Ames?
I'm Amy Dangerfield on Manect and everything else. And you guys can also check out my show, Dangerous Conversations, on YouTube.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please like, comment, share, click, subscribe, bell notification, all the things. And we'll talk to you next week.